Good afternoon and welcome to the virtual town hall with Provost Vin Del Casino. My name is Shaun Fletcher and I'm an assistant professor of public relations and sport communication here at SJSU in the School of Journalism and Mass Communications. Now, I will serve today as moderator to guide this Q&A. Now, by no means am I speaking on behalf of my colleagues. We've had nearly 300 questions pre-submitted, so your thoughts and concerns will be well represented. Now, having said that, part of my role today will be to move us through the Q&A in a timely manner without sacrificing any of the substance of the answers that we'll hear. We won't be able to get through all of the questions in this 90 minutes that we have together. However, the Provost has committed to establishing an ongoing cadence of communication that you'll hear more about very soon. Now, a couple of housekeeping items to lead us through this time together. So what you see on your screen is you'll have an opportunity to submit your questions in real time. We will begin the discussion with the pre-submitted questions that I just mentioned, but please do take advantage of this opportunity to submit your questions in real time. You can submit these questions using the Q&A function at any time during our town hall today. Simply click on the Q&A button on your meeting control panel at the bottom of your screen. You also will have the opportunity to submit anonymously if you so choose to. Now, again, there won't likely be enough time to answer every single question during the Q&A, but we will download the Q&A feedback and communicate a plan to follow up shortly through existing as well as new platforms. Now, keep in mind, you can also upvote similar questions that you may have had, and we will do our very best to prioritize those and get to them. Lastly, please be aware that we are recording today's event and we will share it out through email in the next day or two. Now, having said that, I will turn things over to Vin.
Shaun, thanks so much. I really appreciate you doing this. In a very busy schedule, it's always amazing to see people rally together. I also just have to say really at the beginning, I have to thank Melanie Schlitzkis from my office. She's done an amazing job bringing this together. Ravisha Mathur, our chair of the Academic Senate, not only finishing her first year in that role, but having done an amazing job of guiding faculty conversation this year, as well as Cliff Gold and Erin Cathy from our campus who are helping manage the back of house work here today, which is obviously very challenging. And then finally, I have to thank the people who submitted more than 300 various questions from across the division. I know they came from faculty. They also came from staff. I imagine there's student workers who are asking questions as well. It clearly shows the level of engagement that our division has and the commitment and care we have to doing whatever we have to do to deliver high quality education. So thanks a ton. And again, Shaun, thank you so much for doing this work.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive in. So we've synthesized over 300 questions into a number of categories and buckets that are going to guide this discussion today. The first deals with campus reopening. All right, we received quite a bit, and I'll speak for myself. We received quite a few communications through various channels, primarily email, that can be somewhat overwhelming. So this is a great opportunity for us to hear a bit more specifically on what it means in terms of campus reopening. Now, Vin, can you talk a bit about what do we need to do to make all of this happen as it relates to campus reopening in the fall?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, as you know, in the middle of March, we were charged with some really challenging questions about what to do. And we decided to close down for 4 days, which was the maximum that the system office allowed us to close the campus, to basically move to a remote environment. We never closed the entire campus. The campus has been open with various services, but we've really minimized the amount of people on the campus. And this is right now what we're developing is really an adaptation and recovery plan of what it looks like to eventually get back to the kind of campus we've been for the majority of the 160 years we've been around. So that phase one, which is in many ways slowly coming to an end right now, was everything that we taught fully online or remote, minimum staff on the campus, a lot of remote work for staff, and really only essential personnel on the campus. So that people know there's a lot of contextual pieces to the process, because we have to listen to the Santa Clara Public Health, county officials, we have to listen to the state, and we have to listen to the system office. So all of these players impact what we can do. We're not just allowed to make independent decisions without thinking about this. Mm-hmm. And no matter what, as we go through, safety has got to be our highest concern for our students, for our faculty, and our staff. So the next phase of really 4 phases for the campus is a slight reopening, allowing a few more people on campus. But this summer, for example, we're staying fully online for teaching. We're going to allow a little bit of research that's deadline driven, might be really highly required. Faculty will probably be able to re-enter the field a little bit, but they're going to have to guarantee they're following certain protocols and so forth. And the majority of our work will remain pretty similar to what it's been in phase 1, which most people staying off the campus. What we hope to get to as a campus by fall is phase 3. And phase 3 is where, we still there are at-risk populations that are going to have to stay away from the campus, but more personnel might come to campus, but we're really going to manage that. Because one of the things is the biggest issue we know, and the biggest factor in mitigating, is distance, physical distance between people. So we really have to going to manage offices and things like that. So telework is still going to be highly encouraged, but we're going to try to bring those really critical classes back to a face-to-face environment. And those are lab courses and music and dance and art studio, things that are just hands-on that we cannot do, the research experiences and so forth. And it's going to take a lot of work. And so that's phase 3. And phase 3 in my mind is going to stretch through the fall. I think people are not certain of, what it's going to look like. Phase 4 is that full reopening where we are now. What people need to be aware of, though, is it's possible that if there's a resurgence, this is not just, oh, good, we're in phase 2, we go to phase 3. We could go from phase 3 back to phase 1 if the county of Santa Clara all of a sudden declares shelter in place again. So we're going to have to be really adaptable and also understand that the decisions are not completely our own on the campus. So those are kind of the critical benchmarks, right? Is safety and managing the amount of people on campus and things like that. I'm even working right now with facilities folks. We're bringing a group of academics and facilities people together to plan how we can move around the campus. So we're going to use transportation and urban and regional planning and public health faculty to think about the best way to kind of map the campus so people can be as safe as possible when they return.
You talked a bit, you gave us a bit of insight as to what campus may look like. Can you stay there for a moment and talk a bit more in detail? What might campus look like? I'd venture to say it's going to look a little bit different than the last time that we were there.
Yeah, I mean, it's really challenging. So, the county still has said no large events or anything like that. So our event center, big events in the student union, we are not going to see those in the fall, right? And we're going to really try to limit the things we're going to do on campus are still going to be largely essential. So I don't know the exact number because we haven't done all the math, but I can't imagine more than 20 or 25% of the staff being on the campus at any given time. Plus the fact there's a whole part of our community that even if they wanted to, shouldn't be on campus because the risk is too high. So I think we're really going to be rotating people into offices and so forth. And some colleges and departments are going to look different than others because some are going to be more remote. They're really going to be doing a lot of remote learning. Some of them are going to be opening up those labs again. And so the tech support has got to be there on the ground. And so there's not one blanket that we can put over the campus and say, look this way. We really have to listen to each department in each community. But the truth is, we're going to be very limited. I had a conversation with my own team, You know those shared kitchens with microwaves and fridges, and where we can't use those in the fall. That sharing that kind of space is a risk that we don't necessarily want to take. So even our experiences of coming to campus are going to be different. It's going to be, for me, I feel it. I'm a very social person. I love walking through the office and engaging my colleagues. I've missed that the most, of walking out into campus. But we're not going to have people congregated on the Paseo. We're going to remain a really virtual sort of place through the fall. Now, reminded too that the system has said the majority of our classes must be online in the fall already. So the system has already dictated some of the ways in which we're going to operate. So bringing staff back when we're largely remote in the teaching space doesn't seem to make a lot of sense if the safest way to do this is to minimize the number of days that people are on campus.
Now, Vin, as you know, and much of that, it brings an air of complexity. And as you know, success is in the details. Talk a bit about how will that be managed? Who's going to manage that? Even down to the kitchen area. How is all of that going to be managed to the best of your knowledge at this point?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I mean, the truth is we have this campaign, SJSU United, and the only way public health works in a crisis like this is when each of us sees ourselves not as an individual, but as a member of a community. So we all have to walk in knowing that I got to wear a mask, even though I don't like it, it's uncomfortable. But when I walk through public spaces, I have to pay attention to this. So we're not going to have a police force walking around the campus going, you know, that's not the way you're going to do this. At the same time, it's very possible that we'll keep key card access only to our buildings because we're a very open urban space. And we're going to have to manage more than just the bodies of our students and ourselves. We're going to have to talk to the public as well. So we're going to have plans put in place. In fact, the facilities people are already looking at each workspace around campus, determining how much square footage is there. And we're probably going to go with about a 300 square foot per person strategy based on kind of national guidelines. And when we can't meet that, we're going to put plexiglass and other things like that up. So throughout this summer, it's planning all those pieces in. And we're working now with every college, which is working with every department, to try to get a sense of their needs. Because again, they are unique. But where they're unique, the safety standards have to be the same. And that's the trick of where we are. So the plan that we have to submit to the system breaks down each one of these categories: facilities, teaching and learning, student support, and talks through how we're going to try to offer these up and how we're going to keep our buildings open, but also maintain safety. What are the cleaning schedules going to be like? How are we going to manage that? How do we have to invest in more support services like teaching assistants if we're going to have to spread labs across multiple rooms, right? Teachers can't be running back and forth. So we have to have a strategy for all these things. It is a very, very complicated machine. Right now, the truth is, when you look at our schedule, which we redid in April already, we were ahead of the curve, and we actually told our students where we're going to be. At the undergrad level, we only have about 13 to 14% of our classes that are currently scheduled with some face-to-face experience right now. So I think we can manage, but we have to distribute those effectively and all those kind of things. And we have to bring faculty, staff, and the administration together. And the challenge for faculty is, right, they're going to be off for the summer. So we're really going to be working through the leadership, the department chairs, and others, right, to make sure that as many voices are heard in this process. But the key is here, we are going to invest in that safety, and we want to invest in the increasing quality of the student experience and the learning experience as we go forward, even though this is going to be a tough budget year.
Now, Vin, you mentioned a lot within that, and we're going to touch more on those things a bit later in our Q&A. But let me get really basic and ask a question that was submitted earlier. You talk about safety masks and disinfectants and things like that. Where's that coming from?
Yeah.
Are we to provide that? Is SJSU providing that? Talk a little bit about that.
You know, I think, well, the city of San Jose, I think, might pass an ordinance in about a week or two that's going to require masks in public. So the truth is, at the basic level, I think every member of our community will be responsible for having a mask and bringing that with them to work and gloves. That being said, there's a lot more needed when you're working in a lab or you're doing something else. So we're buying that, what they call that PPE, that protective equipment, in bulk, and making sure it's going to be distributed throughout the campus, particularly in places where we know people are going to be and where they're going to congregate. So we can't put all the responsibility for all of that. We can't expect someone to log in all their own wipes and Clorox because they're teaching. That's not appropriate. But we are going to ask, as members of our community, that we do the basic level of work ourselves and come prepared for that when we come back to the campus.
Now, before we move into talking a bit about instruction and what that may look like in the fall, talk a little bit more about what benchmarks do we need to meet before we even considering fully reopening in the fall?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a really interesting question because I think the schedule we have is the schedule we need to largely go forward with, because students are making decisions now, right? So a student who's in Los Angeles is going, you know what? I already know these 5 classes are online. I'm going to save that rent for 6 months, and I'm going to stay in LA but I'm going to stay connected to the university. So to fully reopening and bringing everything back, the truth is we probably need some level of either vaccine or a really new understanding of spread. And the problem we have right now is the way COVID operates. It is very airborne and very effective when people are close to each other. So as long as that's kind of with us, the physical distancing component, we're going to have some mix of online and face-to-face experiences, and we're going to have to limit that. And there's a lot of debate right now. As somebody, my work started with the HIV epidemic in the 1990s. That's where I focused my own work. And we've been talking about a vaccine for HIV since the HIV epidemic broke and people started, defining it as a retrovirus and so forth. I know COVID's a very different type of virus, but it doesn't mean that we're going to be able to snap our fingers and move. And so the other big questions are, will we be able to bring testing to campus? How often could we test? How effective is that? Because one of the big debates right now is how much is transmitted asymptomatically. And that's really what makes this a troubling sort of viral spread, is we don't know as much of that. So to get to phase 4, I think is what your question is, I think we're going to have really strong confidence that the likelihood of transmission is really low on the campus in order to reopen fully.
And I'm going to go a bit off script, but we've chatted a little bit about this before. We're receiving so much information from the national news, even international news, from the county level, state level, and now here is our sort of category 1 area from SJSU.
Yeah.
What's your recommendation on managing all of that information that we're receiving, and some of which are a bit contradictory to one another? That's all laddering up to us feeling comfortable and safe moving forward with these phased plans that you're talking so much about.
I am a geographer, so I'm gonna speak geographically. And the way we need to think about this is the rules we apply locally are the primary rules, but we're responsible to the county. And the county's the closest geographic level to us. And Santa Clara County has been very conservative, leading the movement, for example, in shelter in place. We're one of the very first counties. We helped with the coalition of the Bay counties and so forth. And so we have to listen to Santa Clara Public Health. So if they go back to shelter in place, we have to go back to shelter in place. The truth is the state and the federal levels are already looser than those things. So I think the primary focus, if I'm an employee or a student or staff member, right, our faculty here, is I pay attention to our plan, what we're saying, and then look at, if you really want to know where we're going to go next, the county is a very important next step. And what's interesting right now is that coalition of Bay Area counties is not as strong as it's been, but we have to pay attention. So May 22nd, this Friday, Santa Clara County moves to phase 2, which is they're going to allow some retail, only curbside service, but some retail opening. That allows us to say, okay, you know what, some field-based work with, if you've got a federal deadline. Because interestingly, our own researchers, to your point, are getting pulled in multiple directions. We have people who get money from the federal government. The federal government's like, you've been collecting these data every June for the last 20 years. Go out and collect the data this June.
Yeah.
And we're telling them shelter in place. So what's having to happen is we're creating processes to evaluate but quickly endorse faculty who need to go do that work, right? But like the truth is, if you're going to go out and do field work, you're a geologist, you're going to have to do it by yourself. You're going to have to drive yourself, make sure you have the PPE lined up. If you've got a team, social distancing, we can't just fill vans up with people like we've done in the past and go out. So we got to get through each one of these steps. The nice thing is our VPRI, and maybe we should have a conversation. The next one would be with him, where is the risk of recovery plan? How are we going to do this? How does that match up with the lab needs and so forth on the campus and things like that? I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but I think those questions are really important. But I would stay focused with us, and Santa Clara are our primary, day-to-day operational indicators.
No, that's great. And I appreciate you flexing to answer that question. I know that was not one of our pre-submitted questions, but I think it's a fair assumption to say that many of us are overwhelmed with information, not just from SJSU, but from all different outlets and sources that we consume. So trying to get some semblance of understanding and clarity is important, not just for us to feel comfortable doing our jobs, but also for our mental well-being as well. So let's pivot a bit. We talked sort of the big, broader picture around fall reopening and what campus may look like. Let's talk about instruction in the fall. What might that look like? Starting with faculty, what might that look like?
As we have it now, the majority is going to be remote. It has to be remote. The system has already mandated that. And again, what we did in April is we largely reorganized the schedule of classes to that. And as opposed to the provost office saying, here are the guidelines for face-to-face, we asked local colleges to figure that out, talk to their department chairs, talk to their colleagues to figure out what really needs. And we let them leave that. And now we're looking what all that is. But amazing job. But it is going to be largely remote. And that's why we're investing in the training this summer, because people are still in a space where a lot of people are teaching in a way that they were not trained to be in and not necessarily comfortable in. And so we have to be able to we have to provide resources to people so that they feel more comfortable in that space. The majority of what people have lined up right now still is synchronous. They're going to do it like this. You hold your class, and I'm going to do it at 11 to 12:15, Tuesday, Thursday. We didn't say do it one way or another, So we're really letting faculty pedagogically decide what makes the most sense. And then we're going to try to get resources aligned, because I think some people might shift over the summer and go, oh, I could do a little this in a more hybrid way. Maybe I will pre-record some things and do some exercises and then bring people together for discussion. And we want to allow for that flexibility. But it's going to remain challenging, because online education takes a lot of iterative work, because when you're remote, it's harder to hold people together sometimes. That being said, I've worked in this space for quite some time. You also can get increased amount of interaction and so forth, because people all of a sudden are freed up to talk in multiple kinds of ways. But that experience for majority of folks, the folks who are on campus have the opportunity, let's say, teach a face-to-face class. I've already had, we're thinking of building stages outdoors and putting tent tops over them so that we could teach dance outside. Because a lot of what the epidemiologists are telling us right now is one of the best ways is to reduce is to be outdoors. We have some challenges with ventilation and so forth. Even then, those dancers are going to have to remain socially distant. So the kind of interactive ballet that one might have is not going to be the teaching experience that a choreographer is going to be setting up for somebody right now. The same thing with our lab sciences. We're going to have labs. We want, like the College of Science made the decision, let's do the upper division labs so we can do them well. But no matter what, they're going to have to take that lab of 25 and probably split it into 3 groups. So faculty are going to have more teaching assistants than they've had before probably, who are going to have to help manage those spaces. So we got to look into all this. What's nice is the president has authorized spending out of the CARES Act for this. I believe you need to invest into a crisis. You can't just cut. And I'm really glad we have a president that supports that philosophy, because I could tell you some of the campuses are just taking the CARES Act money and trying to buffer the budget problem. But if we don't invest in the people and the resources and the infrastructure, so we're creating mechanisms right now for the colleges to collect up things they might need that might be unique for the fall so that we can invest in them. Because I don't want people putting tower funds and research expenditures that they get towards those teaching materials. So we're creating those mechanisms as we go. And I will say, just so it's very transparent to everybody, I'm as confused as everyone else is, because I'm also watching all this news. So every day I'm trying to figure this out in relation to where we are, of what is a level of safety that we feel comfortable with. I have to say, as a last point though, Shaun, the system has said they want to review everything we're going to do face-to-face before we officially launch it. So right now I've got a system level over me that's saying, hey, why do you think, what's the pedagogical value add relative to the risk for that particular class? So I'm confident we've actually done that work, but it is a question we're going to have to go through.
So Vin, that's an interesting sort of scenario. It has to be proposed and presumably passed on the CSU level. But you mentioned ideas like the staging for performing arts, the labs and things of that nature. I would assume from a strategic planning standpoint, you'll have to get to a certain deadline in order to be set on what your proposal is going to be to submit. Any idea as to what that cadence is going to be? Because ultimately, we're kind of like the cup and saucer with this. We're the saucer. We get that after you've already planned it. Right. Any timeline you could share?
We're pushing for the system to give us the guidelines and let us know. I mean, originally it was going to be the end of May, but we haven't got the guidelines yet. So I think sometime in June, we're going to have to produce these plans. We have a draft plan, and it's a really good one. We've been working on a draft plan, and a lot of input. The president went and spoke with, for example, with the faculty leadership of the Senate for an hour and a half the other day, and got a lot of good feedback. In fact, that question of resurgence came up, and it was like, yeah, we could fall backwards, not always go forward. So what does that look like? So yeah, I'm hoping that we get those soon and we get an understanding of exactly what we're being asked to turn in. I will say my opinion of this is, I want the system to trust us that we know what we're doing, and we can do that quickly once we have it. I believe that the due diligence of the faculty on this campus has already been done. There's a few grad seminars I think we could debate about, but I don't think anyone went off and just did their own thing and said, I don't buy into this. Everyone's been incredibly thoughtful. And so I hope it's just a validation of the work that's been done already, as opposed to, now we have to rejigger the schedule and things like that. I will say one last quick thing about fall, sorry, because of the timeline. I do think people need to be prepared if a resurgence happens in mid-fall,
Mm-hmm.
that we could have to pull everything back off the campus again like we did this spring. So I think if I was sending a signal to people planning their classes, I try to front load a lot and have like managed more independent work toward the back end of the semester as you can. I'm not saying you have to do it this way, but where you can do that, you're better off in case we get a big rise and a big spike in the middle of the term.
Mm-hmm. A couple of more questions around fall instruction, and then we'll move to talk a bit more about risk of impact. Can you talk a little bit, if there exists a filter through which you'll be deciding what classes will be allowed to meet on campus in person?
Right. So what I've done so far is I've left that to the local levels, because I didn't want to come in and tell the humanities and arts dean, well, I'm a geographer, so here's what I think and how you should do this. We wanted that to work from the bottom up. And I'm looking for a high level creativity. And what I've seen so far is a high level creativity where the music department's like, we can do ensemble work if everyone's, if we use the stage this way, right?
Yeah.
We can do one-on-one lessons in this way. The dance idea again. I mean, I don't know how many people know this, but some of the engineers figured out how to teach remotely to the labs. So they had teaching assistants in the labs, and the students were able to start to access things remotely. I want to free up that level of creativity so people feel ownership of the learning. So what does that mean? Well, then they're going to have to demonstrate. They're going to tell us this is what we've done, and I'm going to some level have to put that on paper and send it to the system. And the metrics are they're relatively simple, because we have got to maintain the physical distancing. No matter what, we have to maintain that, and therefore we have to reduce spread. That means that in labs we'll have very few people at a time, and in other spaces we might use things like plexiglass and so forth, right? And that's what's going to be the guiding principles, or those basic principles, which the Santa Clara County hasn't changed at any level since the start.
As you take a sip of coffee, talk a little bit about what does fall look like for staff?
Yeah, this is really hard because, as you know, the staff are the lifeblood of the place. I mean, they keep things going. They're often the face, the first face students see when they walk into an office and so forth. But we're going to have to be very careful in this space as well. And, we don't want to increase risk unnecessarily for people. So I think come early fall, we will still be at a low threshold of staffing. I'm even talking about my office with my colleagues. The suite that we have probably should be one person in at a time. Like, we shouldn't have more than one person, which means, how many days a week should we be there? So we've learned very quickly how to work remotely, but I think it's going to be part of our lives. And then when you're a staff member on campus, masks are going to be important when you walk from if you're in a private office to the next space. If you're in a cubicle, we're going to probably have people far enough away that you're not wearing the mask all day when you're sitting doing your basic work. But when you get up and walk around, that's the kind of thing. When you have your lunch, if you want to eat with someone else, you better find a place where you're all spread out, right? And we're not going to be sharing stuff. The kind of buffet lunch that one might have, or even, water coolers. We're not going to be buying the water cooler water, right? So people are going to have to come prepared, old-fashioned way, with their lunchbox, with everything they need for the day. And you want to keep it cool yourself, because even microwaves are not necessarily a safe, environment, because we have to trust that everybody did the wiping every single time, right? So we're really going to limit that. And that's a bummer, because it's those informal conversations we have that make a university so interesting and exciting.
Yeah.
But it crashes up against the public safety concerns. So I do think staff life is going to be very different still, and a lot of people will be working remotely, either most of the time or a high percentage of the time. And it will vary. It will vary depending on how things. We have an animal care program, right? We have to have someone on campus every day because the animals need to be tended for. That kind of thing is different, right?
And because our staff tend to be the glue of the operation, I know I lean on our staff quite a bit in order to get a lot of instruction and direction that we need to do our jobs. Will they receive their instructions and their framing of how they move forward in a similar localized fashion as you mentioned earlier? What can they expect?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's going to be, again, some general guidelines, like how much square footage should someone, be managed. And so if we have a front office that's 275 square feet, we already know the answer. One person is in there. And then what I think the densities of people or how often staff are on campus will depend on the activity. So if you look at the College of Social Science and the Lucas College of Business right now, I think almost 100% of what they're looking at right now is online in the fall for faculty, right? So that obviously has an impact then on the staff, because faculty are probably going to remain working remotely. They're not coming in looking for copies and all those kind of things. And again, we're largely going to try to manage those things. So their jobs are going to be slightly different than it might be in engineering. And then on top of it, it gets more complicated, because if you're over 65 or in a risk group, we have to be able to maintain your safety anyway, regardless of how your department is going. So it's got to be both individual and collective. We've got to have some overarching guidelines and minimum expectations for how people are comport themselves on the campus, but also then enough flexibility so departments can still run and do the things they need to do.
Now let's transition a bit and talk about risk activity. Obviously, with everything else that came to a halt, so too did the risk activity. Talk a little bit about what are we doing? What are you doing? Not we, but what's being done to address the risk activity moving forward, but also taking into account the impact that this has had during this spring semester, moving into summer semester.
Yeah, no, it's really important to have this conversation. For those who are dependent on the physical infrastructure of the campus to make their RISCA successful, obviously everything shut down instantaneously. For those who travel internationally, I'm a Southeast Asianist, right? My research would have been, boom, like I'm not going anywhere this summer. So for each one of us, right, we're impacted differently, but, kind of uniformly, that not a lot of that work was able to get done. On top of all the other realities of if you have children or you have elder care or you're in a small place, so many factors, right, have impacted this. The nice thing is, people ask me when I took the job, are you concerned that there's a new vice president for research and innovation, then that's not in the provost's office? And I will tell you now, absolutely not. I'm so excited that I have a partner there, and in part, a partner with a team that are spending a ton of time on how to help manage the ramping back up of risk activity on campus and so forth. I think that's going to be done thoughtfully and well. The Office of the Provost, though, to the second part of your question, has to think about what does this mean for the tenure promotion process of all these faculty who've now been impacted by this. And a lot of people push for clock stoppage, and I'm actually, no problem. I think we get those done quickly and so forth, if that's what people want. And we're going to do it in a way like, you know what, I didn't need it. Can I pull it back and go up? Yes, no problem. But there's a larger conversation here, which is a very complicated one. And I've asked it of a lot of people. And I want to be very straightforward here. I'm talking in a way where I don't have the answers, right? But I have questions. And so what I mean by that is we are allowed to talk about the broader impact of something that's external to us when we write up our narrative. We're allowed to say it, and we can say, like, look, COVID, here's what I was doing. COVID happened. This is what I can do now.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that's really important, because my concern with the tenure clock stoppage issue is people are putting themselves another year away from one of the only two major raises you get as a faculty member in the system, right? Mm-hmm. You're slowing your time and progress through your career. And so I think we have to try to figure out how to account for it. And I actually saw it this year, because this is my first year doing RTP here.
Yeah.
There were a couple of cases where, like, things happened that put someone back 2-3 years who's completely outside their control. And when I reviewed those cases, I went, you know what? I can evaluate where they were going and where they're planning to go, and understand that it's maybe not as robust as we want. Now, that's really tricky. Mm-hmm. And this is why I'm trying to speak openly and candidly without a definitive answer here. Mm-hmm. You know, the Professional Standards Committee has to chew on this question. The deans have to chew on this question. We have to train people effectively to make sure that they're looking at these RTP documents consistently in a way that everyone understands what that looks like. And not everyone is going to agree. Mm-hmm. Some people are just going to take the clock stoppage. And yet, national data show us the drop in women submitting publications. The day that shelter in place happened, women's participation in the political economy of publishing dropped precipitously relative to men. Well, clock stoppage isn't going to fix that. That's a fundamental set of problems of division of labor in the household, the gendered politics of work, right? And so this is messy, but I think we have to tackle it as a campus so that we can promote and support our outstanding faculty colleagues, understanding that something happened to them that they had no control over, zero control. It was easy with soaps. We just went, all right, don't worry about your soaps this spring.
Yeah.
But risk is harder. It's a blurrier space, right? It's a messier space. But we've got to be able to work through that. And I'm committed to that, working through that and providing clear guidelines and training and support so that people are treated fairly in relation to what the consequences of this epidemic.
And we could have our own town hall just about this question. So I won't send us on a tangent on that, but just to drill down a little bit further on something you talked about around alignment and consistency. Yeah. I'm not telling any tales out of school to say that has been a concern for many, myself included. What type of assurance and where should we look in terms of that assurance to make sure that consistency and alignment is taking place?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, you know, I think the buck certainly stops at the provost office. You know, the messaging has to be clear out of the provost office of the broader expectations. At the same time, the faculty set the guidelines, right? The faculty make the recommendations to the president on what RTP should look like. At the end of the day, it's presidential policy, but, you know, it is the thoughtfulness of the faculty. And what has been nice, and where I've seen us come together and align over the last several months is, you know, several quick resolutions that got us to a place that at least gave everyone, I could breathe a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing worse than watching your colleagues, you know, get really anxious over something that is so out of their control. And so we've got to figure this out. But I think it starts here, but I think it also is collectively faculty. To the point of messaging, it has to be crystal clear this year as we train RTP committees, and we're going to train them. I'm committed to training all the RTP committees. We're going to increase the work on implicit bias, right? That comes through. You know, Kathy Wong Lau is coming on board to do even more of that work for the fall, right? And all of this has to be layered in. So we've got to deliver on the training. The faculty have to think about their own roles in this. and then we have to kind of come together and at some level, trust that we've put that all together. But I think people challenging me or the administration or their faculty leadership, I think that's important if they don't see or are satisfied with the way in which we're trying to pull this together. And the truth is, it's not a simple one answer like, all right, let's just take the SOTs and put them aside for a semester. It is messier because, how research works is not linear. It bounces. It's continued on all these other relations and so forth. So, yeah.
And again, there's a ton more that we could talk more about related to risk activities, and that I'm certain we will, based upon your appetite to continue this dialogue through other channels. So I want to circle back a little bit as it relates to staff. Again, I want to keep the balance of faculty focus versus staff and some of the other levels and responsibilities we have on campus. Can you talk a little bit about the remote working option for staff? Will they have an equal amount of flexibility or a measure of flexibility, period, to work remotely if need be? What goes into that?
Well, I think, this is part of a larger conversation of the campus and really, bringing HR and everybody together.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know in my gut, we're not bringing a lot of people back every day because the more people you put on the campus, the higher the risk you have. So I think we're going to maintain a pretty high level of flexibility. That being said, there are some jobs that really do need to be on campus. And if people can or can't do those jobs, then we have to take advantage of all the various mechanisms that are available through the HR process. Plus we have, the relationship with the various unions and so forth that govern the different types of work on the campus as well. But I mean, the goal is, is safety first. That's going to be our primary goal. But that doesn't mean that sometimes someone's not essential to the work of the campus and is going to be asked to come back.
Can you explain a little bit about the thought process and the strategy? You talked a little bit about it earlier, understanding the risk categories of our staff and faculty as it relates to coming back to campus or not. Can you talk a little bit about, have those been assessed? Is there a plan? Does that factor into it in terms of, because now that starts to get into more of the sort of personal, some may feel intrusive side of making these decisions? What goes into that? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, we obviously have some public health guidelines, right? Yeah. Those public health guidelines have currently told us, for sure 65 and older, but I'm 52, almost 52. I'm in that secondary risk group just for being 52, right? Yeah. So there's that group. It turns out on the faculty side, I don't have the staff numbers. I wish I did, but on the faculty side, it turns out right now we have 100 tenure track and 264 lecturers who are over 65 years old. I mean, that's about 15% of our teaching workforce right there. I imagine our staff match that at some level, if not even exceed it. So if we got that population. The secondary group, right, are people with hypertension, autoimmune issues, which we can't ask people to formally report. Those are personal health issues. But they're going to have to, if they can't be on campus, those are going to be some of the things we're going to. Asthma, if you really have a strong asthma problem, that is something, where public health is saying you're in a higher risk group. I don't want to overspeak for HR though, about all those processes. I'm not an expert in all of that, but there's no doubt that we have to take those public health guidelines and apply them at a certain level to the work we're asking people to do.
And let's talk a little bit about, and this is getting into the tougher questions. We've heard a lot of information nationally, for the most part, about furloughs due to low enrollment and other reasons. Are we anticipating any of that impacting our campus?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So let's talk about where the decision making lies for those things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was in the system the last time we furloughed. I was department chair.
Mm-hmm.
The longest year of leadership of my life, I think. And last time it happened, the governor called for, it was Schwarzenegger at the time, called for furloughing civil servants. We are not governed by that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the system has to make the decision. So if Newsom requests pay cuts or furloughs, the question will be, will the system respond in kind?
Mm-hmm.
Last time the answer was yes. There has been to date, though, and I meet with the provost every week or two, we have not once discussed furloughs or pay cuts as a strategy.
Got it.
So, and it's not at the campus level, one, that we could employ it, but two, that we've talked about it, right? So that being said, let's just be really honest about where we are, just so people understand it. The May revision took what was ostensibly a 5% increase request at $199 million, which was in January, cut that, and then cut another $400 million. Right? So we have a 15% turnaround from where we were in January. Now, on our base, that means 10% right there. So we're going to have to manage that somehow. And that, those are challenging questions, how we do that. But that's the frame, that's the kind of lens that we need to be using right now. But what the state has also said is in July, they're probably going to reevaluate the budget, because that's when they're going to collect the taxes. Because as many people know, they didn't collect taxes in April. They moved it to July.
Yeah.
So the state's going to get a different picture. They could revise the budget again. So we have to be prepared for whatever that looks like. But the idea of furloughs and pay cuts are not there at the moment.
Got it. Okay. So I'm going to bounce back and forth a bit, because we have a strong support for a few questions coming through the Q&A. And then I'll come back to the pre-submitted questions after we get through a few of these. So one question coming in that has received a number of upvotes is about plagiarism and how that has spiked with the transition of online teaching. They're asking, they're saying, I'm curious to know what the university intends to do about the rise in plagiarism that transitioning to online teaching has revealed, not just on our campus, but nationally as well. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can. In general, let's take broadly cheating and plagiarism.
Yeah.
And having worked in the online space a lot, part of it is there's only so much you can do institutionally. A lot of it is pedagogical change. So the way in which one asks questions and how one engages students changes the nature of how easy or hard it is to cheat. So when I started doing this, as a practical example, I went to open book but shorter timed quizzes and so forth. I'm like, they got all the material in front of them. I just need to know they're the one logged in, and then let them go to town. Yep. A lot of it was then writing and drafts and rewriting, so that I knew it was their ideas that were building. The other thing I started doing a lot of was I was assessing people on short video presentations, where again, they had to put together an argument, and then they turned in a script and a video. It's very hard to plagiarize that, especially if you're asking them to nuance certain pieces. So in some way, you have to alter your assessment strategies. I know this is what I'm doing, is putting the burden on faculty, but it is true that the faculty own the assessment culture. So in an online world, when I did my quizzes, I would generate 3 times the number of questions the students needed and randomize those to them. It turns out in the end, I got a pretty decent curve, and you could tell that it would be very hard to cheat. So there are strategies and techniques one can employ in order to do this. The softwares for doing the work of watching students and so forth are also partially contingent on the faculty and the rules they set for how they're going to look at what that looks like. So again, where you could go to places where it's very difficult to cheat. So let's say you do have an online exam, but it is open book. So it doesn't matter if they're looking at all this material, and we can lock down browsers and stuff. But it does, at the end of the day, push us to rethink a bit what we do. Now, is cheating any higher in online spaces than in face-to-face when you had the giant studio? Could we keep our eye on 600 students at the same time? I think we need to have some genuine conversation if there was a nirvana before online. The other thing we can talk about, though, and I will talk about as a campus strategy, if faculty are looking for this as a potential option, is we might be able to bring some testing back to campus this fall. If we're going to have some face-to-face, is there a way to set up a testing center where we could bring people in as a way to kind of mitigate some of this? That's a possibility. The challenge is, though, your students could be spread all over the state. So we're going to have to figure out how to accommodate them. There's a conversation among the CSUs, could we be optional testing centers for each other? So I think it's worth having these systemic conversations. Systemic, I mean system-wide conversations, and some of these other strategies that could come from the university. But if you're going through the training this summer, I think paying attention to assessment will be critical. There's going to be a whole focus on it. And I'm amazed, by the way, we've had over 1,000 faculty sign up for the training this summer. What a commitment. Unbelievable commitment. I know we can do more. I wish there were a lot more we could do, but I mean, amazing. But those are the kind of things that you want to get out of a workshop like that, how to think that stuff through and mediate as much of it on the front end, because you're exhausted by the end of the semester if you're chasing these students down all the time.
And can you, perhaps this is just for me, but can you ease some concern if you can at this point, because a lot of what you're mentioning still seems to be in the ideation phase of it, understandably so, but through a timeline of events that take place leading up to decisions needing to be made, and then the cascade of the different personnel needing to prepare themselves, we're looking at the possibility of a ton of mandates coming down at one time, perhaps. Have you thought through, and your colleagues thought through, sort of a cadence of when the CSU level decisions, the county level decisions, the decisions, as you just mentioned, that about possibly having these testing centers, when those decisions are made, how might we find those out in a less than overwhelming way, I'll say?
Well, I think it's timeliness of when a decision is made, we get out as quickly as possible and communicate it. So if the system is telling us what the guidelines look like, communicating that out and letting everyone know right away. The testing center idea, which is one that's been bandied about, it demands looking at the spatial organization of the campus and identifying something that will work. And what I don't want to do, and thank you for asking the question the way you've asked it, Shaun, I don't want to interfere with the face-to-face education that people are trying to plan right now. Because you can only imagine, right, how hard it's going to be to take the 100 labs that the College of Science has and split them into 300 rooms. So I kind of want to let that work itself out so that they have priority in the spacing before we go, all right, or take a big space offline that somebody really had intended to use. So I got to really hear from the bottom where they are with some of that planning. And that's what we're doing right now is we want to break the physical classes apart and really understand them and understand all their room needs. I'm hoping that 2 to 3 weeks we can get all that hammered out, and then we can move to one of the next steps and so forth.
Got it. Let's stay on the topic of support. We have another question that came in that says they're also interested to know what resources the university intends to provide for lecturers and other faculty to purchase things like external storage for saving recorded lectures. They'd also like to know what resources the university intends to provide to offset some of these unanticipated costs. And as we know, it even expands beyond some of the examples mentioned in the question.
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. I mean, we tried as best we could this spring to get our hands on as much stuff as possible and open up access. We're going to do another round. This is another opportunity with the CARES Act money where we have to invest. We have to invest even though we're in a tight budget environment. So we're looking at laptops and the basic equipment that people need with webcams and microphones and other things like that, and to have opportunity to distribute those back through IT. The storage question's a really interesting one, just kind of popped. It's an obvious one, but that's really a larger conversation with IT. You know, is it best to expand cloud space for that as opposed to really giving people physical devices? What's the best way to strategize to maintain that? We eventually found in my previous job, because you're right, we expanded server access on the campus. That was a simpler way to do it because then people could do this. The other things that are happening, and I will tell you, I understand the frustration of like all the things that are being thrown at people. At the same time, I do think IT has done a lot in responding. One of the things they've done, we're looking at all these softwares right now, SPS, a lot of things that people use a lot, and virtualizing them. So people don't need individual copies anymore, and they can log in through one SJSU and get access to these materials. That's going to simplify a lot of people's lives as well. So they're working through a lot of that right now, to basically moving faster than we had planned to remote desktop and stuff like that. So the other side of it then is you don't need as fancy equipment in front of you to run those things virtually. You can have simpler equipment that doesn't need as many bells and whistles. But I think, and so we're going to ramp up the buying and purchasing of laptops, not just for faculty and so forth, but for students who are going to find themselves equally behind the eight ball, because we certainly have students who are really putting their life savings into this and are already on the margins when it comes to having access to those resources. The other big thing that I'm trying to do right now is I'm asking through the colleges, are there big purchases, unique purchases that are going to transform teaching and learning this semester that you need to make? So for example, engineering is considering buying some type of tool that could be distributed to students and used in multiple classes to plug in and create a virtual lab experience, but have the technology. So we're trying to look at these different things. So I'm working with the deans right now to collect up some of these things, and again, try to put CARES Act money on it to increase the infrastructure available. But we're going to be running fast, and the challenge we have, everyone in the world is trying to do this, and production's down. Because people were sent home from work for the right reasons. So it's not a simple, easy fix, but we're trying to move faster to provide as many of the resources as we can.
Thank you for that. And we have about 30 minutes left, so we're going to move through. But you touched on the CARES Act and the allocation of that money. I'd be remiss if I did not ask you a bit of, has any thought gone into this current bill that is sitting with the Senate right now, the HEROES Act? Has any dialogue been had about what that money may do and impact much of this phased approach that we're talking about here, or is it too soon?
You know, it's a really great question. I think the state is sitting there waiting for that to resolve itself as well, because I think they see it potentially as an offset to the budget cuts that they're developing. Yeah. You know, I always have a kind of paranoid fear that the state will go, great, we just got $27 billion for higher ed, we're just going to cut more, and backfill there. I mean, I hate to be a cynic, but it's not, it's not outside the boundaries that something like that could happen. But, every single one of these things is important. So there's been the first CARES Act went to students. We distributed that $14 million directly to students in aid. Yeah. The second CARES Act is with us. The very first thing we invested in, and now it's probably going to be about 1.4 million, is that summer training program. Because with stipends and everything, and we're investing in some technology and stuff like that, right? That's going to cost a chunk of money. Then there's these other things that we're talking about already. Plus, we may have to just invest in IT backbone to get things up. And then the new pot of money, which is for minority serving institutions, which, you know, we're getting a nice solid pot. All that money's got to go. It really has to focus on academic and student support. So we're talking about like that going directly back into the student experience and the support for faculty. Talking with Deanna Peck right now about how much more we could do with peer connections and other things like that, where we're going to invest in teaching assistants. I want to increase access to writing center and math and science support for incoming students, because we know those are difficult areas anyway. So that's the kind of space. And again, I'm really excited that the leadership of the campus, and I'm not talking myself, I'm talking the president here, has said we've got to invest while also being strategic about how we might have to cut, given, you know, where the budget goes.
Got it. Another question that's receiving a lot of interest is around class enrollment capacity. Will class enrollment capacities be reduced in the fall in view of the time and energy consuming nature of online teaching?
Right. That's a really interesting question. And the answer is, I don't have a simple answer to that question. It depends in part on how the course is organized, its assessment strategies, and whether or not we can bring other kinds of support to it, like teaching assistants or something like that. In some cases, it might be advantageous to make a class larger, but bring teaching assistants to it that could really take the assessment burden off the faculty so they can focus on the facilitation and so forth. So I know people want a straightforward, well, let's just drop every class by 5 students, but it's not that simple. You know, you really have to look at what are the requirements and what are we asking people to do. Now, the fact that students might be outreaching more and so forth ties into, you know, how we've historically used office hours and other things like that. But it is going to be more idiosyncratic and really looking at the different ways in which the course is organized for how we'll follow that with support infrastructure, which could lower class size or cap it at a different level or bring different kinds of resources to the table to support that.
So I'll add on to that, since you mentioned support and that being potentially an element that could help to ease some of this. Talk a little bit about hiring. How is hiring being impacted by our current circumstances?
Yeah, well, what was very interesting this spring is, you know, the president and the CFO and I had a lot of conversations about the faculty piece. And we committed to keep going with faculty hiring, and we did. And I think by the time we're done, we're going to have 68 new faculty colleagues, tenure track colleagues on the campus in the fall. We authorized like 91 searches. And those are just, you know, we get failed searches, we get postponed, there are all kinds of reasons. And so ostensibly nothing was cut from this year. Other CSUs, when that memo came out, they stopped. Like whatever was done is done. We didn't go that way. And I think because philosophically we know, and I know because I was in the system last time, it absolutely kills a place when you don't invest in the core mission for 2-3 years. And faculty hiring is key to that. But the truth is that, so that's one component of hiring. So people are asking me a lot, what does fall look like? Well, I have ideas of what I hope we'll be able to do, which is, I don't want a hiring freeze in faculty. But I think we have to look practically at what is our likely turnover? How many people do we think might retire or leave the institution? And be a little more strategic about how we hire next year. But again, if the system puts on a hiring freeze, then I'm handcuffed, right? That's not what happened yet. The chill let the president keep going. In the staff side, what's very important especially for our division to understand is I made the argument, and the president 100% agreed, that in places like advising, like we can't not replace positions. And so right away, we've been authorizing, because the president has authority. She has to review every job we put out there. But she's been doing it. We've replaced strategically, we've invested in advising so far. There are a number of key other staff support positions there are definitely some things we're holding off on, and that's a bummer. But I would say more of those are outside our division than in. Because if we can't keep the teaching and learning experience moving forward, it doesn't matter how many other things we have going, because enrollment drives our budget, right? No matter how much we want to talk about, how we'd love to see the world work, this is a simple kind of equation in the state system that enrollment, we've got to successfully get people through. And so we've got to have people in place to make that happen. So here's the philosophy. The philosophy is to strategically invest even while you have to strategically pull back. And there will not be a cookie cutter, one size fits all approach where we just go, everybody absorb X% of a cut. That's not a way to run a university. It's got to be aligned with our strategic plan. It's got to be aligned with the strategic goals of where we want to go. And so to do that, we need to hire. The question is, how many can we reasonably hire in the coming year? It will be tighter. I'd be a liar if I said, no, we're going to put out hundreds of jobs. We're not, but we're going to focus where we are. And what's important for people to understand is we haven't stopped yet. We're still doing that strategically.
Got it. And we'll come back to that a bit later with the amount of time that we have. But we have another question that came in that's receiving an equal number of upvotes. Is the campus planning some type of recognition or acknowledgement for the essential staff that have been working on campus since the shelter in place and over the summer months?
Yeah, that is so, in fact, what a great question. What an important question. We had no idea. Like when this first started, people were like, is this going to last 2 weeks? Yeah. And all of a sudden we realized 8-9 weeks later, we got people who've just been nonstop, right, from the get-go. I don't want to point individuals out, but I know circumstances. And when we found out about these things, I'm like, we've got to actually hire to backfill so these people can get off campus. And I've prioritized those out of the division. So the way the kind of hiring works is like they come to me and then I send them on to the president with some thoughts. So there have been a couple places where we've got essential staff who've really been stretched and we've got to bring some support to them. And I think now that this is becoming a longer term way that the campus is going to run for a while, we've got to clearly, to your point, recognize and acknowledge that, but also make sure that those folks have some opportunity, to really get the relief that they need. Because, all you have to do is run up against, have 2 or 3 people. You know how thin we are anyway. Yeah. Like we don't have multiple backups for everything in any capacity. And so if someone's out because they've got, a health issue related to COVID, all of a sudden we've got to move quickly to redo that. And the nice thing is we're doing some in emergency hiring and stuff like that. But it's a really important question, and we have to pay more attention to it. I think we're running really fast, and we have to catch up on this one and clearly spell out in the plan how we're going to support those folks long term.
Got it. Another question that's coming in, and with the amount of time that we have about 13 minutes left, so we'll go into full-on real-time Q&A. There's another question that came in that says the staff employee union sent members a message letting us know that we should be prepared for the possibility of salary reductions given the budget crisis that COVID-19 has caused. How likely is this, and are we looking at permanent reductions or furloughs?
So I'm going to just say I've not seen that message, and I don't know where that message comes from. I don't know if that's a preemptive, like, get yourself emotionally prepared. I mean, it is a possibility. That has not been discussed with me at any level as a provost, either in the system or on the campus yet. So to the answer to the question, permanent reductions or furloughs, obviously for me, I mean, if I was going to go one way or another, I mean, furloughs are messy for a different reason. There could also be temporary pay reductions, but I would hate to see permanent reductions. We can't live in that world. We already don't pay people enough to live in the San Jose area. We can't live with permanent reductions. So that doesn't have my endorsement. But I haven't heard anything official about any of that yet, or even unofficial through conversations I've had with others. That doesn't mean it couldn't not happen. I'm not saying that. I don't want to be disingenuous. I just know right now that I don't think that's an option that a lot of the leaderships, well, I'll speak for us. Our leadership doesn't want to go that route. If we have a voice in the system, we would go against that route. So, but there are real consequences, because furloughs do protect larger swaths of jobs sometimes and things. But I have not heard anything specific.
Got it. Another question that came in is, has the university discussed whether any graduation requirements such as physical education will be amended or waived for graduates in certain terms?
Yeah, we've done a little. I mean, we've done a little bit of that. I think going into fall, that's going to be a larger conversation because some colleges like Health and Human Services has this international requirement they clearly had to waive so people could graduate. I do think we may have to look at some of these things. I mean, the phys ed requirement is an interesting one because it begs the question of how much has to be face-to-face. How much phys ed education could you do remotely? And I think the kinesiology department is being challenged by that question. But if we're not able to deliver safely the requirement, then I don't believe we should be holding a student to it to graduate. And that's going to be the question. So we may have to remotely offer a lot more in the phys ed space in order to say it's still a requirement of the campus. As some or most might know, I believe the phys ed requirement was endorsed in Senate policy again a few years ago as a critical component of the campus. So there's Senate policy and other things that would have to be discussed to make it happen. Fortunately, the Senate with the administration this spring moved really quickly, as Chair Mather has said, Academic Senate Chair Mather has said over and over again. The president probably signed the quickest, got something approved the quickest that's ever happened on the campus when she signed the SOTS strategic, and then the no credit change, right? So we can work fast if we have to.
And there's another somewhat comment coming in, but I'll turn into a question. And admittingly so, oftentimes these forums become very faculty centric. Is there a plan similar to what we were talking about at the start for ongoing dialogue and cadences of communication? Is there a plan or an appetite to separate faculty and staff sessions to where you can spend more focused time giving specific information to the different levels, and not just faculty and staff, but there are very nuanced levels on campus who have very specific questions and concerns that they want to get out. Can you talk a little bit about that appetite and interest in doing something like that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I mean, I've spent a lot of time, more time right now, really with different faculty groups. Like I've done two, I don't want to overspeak it, with the chairs and a lot with the associate deans. I meet with the deans now 2 or 3 times a week, given where we are. And with the faculty senate leadership, we've had a couple one-on-ones, and the CFA. We've had several conversations with the California Faculty Association. We have not, in my division, done as much I haven't personally done as much with staff. And I think that's an opportunity, but I'd really want to do that in collaboration with HR, because I don't want to overstep what I know. And I don't want to give people the wrong information. So I think we could absolutely organize some things. And I know that HR is organizing some things, but we can look at some division-wide conversations. But I would love to bring Joanne Wright, for example, to the table for that. Even as well as if we really want to do a deeper dive session on RISCA and how we roll it out, let's bring Mohammed Abu Salam to the table, right? If we want to talk facilities, we now actually have a new AVP for facilities. She starts this week. Let's see if we can get her. But the answer is happy to, yes, continue these conversations. I think they're very important and very critical for us to continue to talk to each other.
We have another question, part statement, part question. And again, you've asked for unfiltered feedback, so I'm not going to clean it up. I'll ask it verbatim.
Right.
Brace yourself. It says, messaging around SJSU policies for classes in the fall has been really horrible. The COVID Chrome around all our pages has almost zero information. Please remove it, they're asking. Everything I've learned about the fall is from students asking me about published news reports. Can the administration please do formal announcements of policies rather than speculation to the media?
Yeah, wow, that is a great comment. And, you know, it is a question of, I mean, so you know what? I'm not going to defend my position. Rather, I'm going to say, no problem. All right, I could definitely have more communication. I will say that for me, I've tried to be incredibly consistent message for message so far. From the first one that I sent before we started to change the calendar to the one that happened most recently, which is to say, you know what, the majority of what we have to do is probably going to be online. That was affirmed when the system came in and said yes. So throughout the spring, through the smattering of messages that I've tried to provide, that's been there. The other thing is, and we've talked about this, Shaun, is how to communicate. Part of the reason to do this is there's only so many email messages people can read. And I've also got to rely that the conversations are happening locally, because I've certainly had a lot with the deans. I've talked with chairs. I've talked with associate deans, and I've not wanted to jump into their business and go, hey, but I've been giving frameworks like, let's be real. What do we really think we have to do face-to-face in the fall? So that's where I've been. The unfortunate thing, of course, is, and you know this, and we've talked a lot about this as someone who's in PR and media relations and so forth. I can say anything I want to a newspaper, and they can write anything they want. Let's take the most recent San Francisco Chronicle one, where it said, I said we were 100% online. And I never said that. I said almost the exact opposite. We're planning. And then there was this barrage of email back about that. One option is to not talk to the media, right? That's an option. But it's kind of hard to do that as well. But I'll own it. I 100% own it that if people don't see that there's been enough communication and clarity about where we're going, part of it today is about that, right? But also how we keep up that cadence, as you say, to make sure that we keep people informed. But what I want, let me address then this question directly.
Yeah.
I believe the fall schedule, as we have it, is the one we're going to use. Modifications to it are going to be on the margins, unless something dramatic changes, like a vaccine appears in July, and they figure out how to distribute it globally, which I don't think is going to happen. So where we are and what we're trying to do is where we are moving into the fall for sure. And I want to get the answers of what spring's going to look like as early as possible as well. But yes, we'll do more. I hear you. It's not a bad question.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you leaning into that question. And I appreciate it being asked in that way. Again, we did not want to pretend as though this was going to be a flowery session. It's designed for the transparency. So I appreciate that. I felt the need to call that out a bit. Now, we only have a couple of minutes left. So with that, I'll end it with a staff question, understanding that there's not going to be any one perfect question to end it on. But again, since we're trying to find a balance in this conversation, there was an interesting question about staff resources and what is the plan to support staff, many of whom are paying out of pocket for some of their equipment. Is there a plan in place to support staff, much of in the way as you talked about faculty resources? Can you talk about our staff colleagues?
Yes, I mean, I think I don't have a straightforward answer to that because I'm not in charge of all of that. And that is an ongoing conversation. I mean, in some ways, you know, if I'm not paying parking, do I pay internet or do I end up having to pay both? And that's where I'm really getting slammed. So there's a lot of contingencies in that question. But at the kind of equipment level, I will say that we need to be reimagining how we distribute equipment in general. And maybe we need to be a more laptop culture than desktop one so that people have more flexibility moving forward. But we do have to provide people with the basic tools that help them do their job. I think that's going to evolve because if it changes in relation to all the conversations, if this extends for a really long period of time. So I don't have a great answer to that question, but part of the goal here is to, again, try to invest where we have to, even as we're trying to peel back in other places to balance the books as we move forward.
Thank you for that. Vin, we have about 1 to 2 minutes left. Anything that you want to leave us with as we transition out of this town hall?
I just want to say, I know how tired people are. And I know how much work people are putting in and how exhausted they are. And I know there's no way for us to manage all of it. And we're trying to do the best we can and manage as much of it as we can. But the key through all of this is we have got to protect the core mission of the institution. And academic affairs as a division is the core mission of the institution, which is we deliver the support and infrastructure for teaching and learning. So we're going to continue to do everything we can to make sure we can deliver on that commitment while also going forward and innovating and being creative where we can to meet the strategic plan. But I hope that people get a little bit of downtime to recharge. I know this is not going to be easy transition. The fall is going to continue to be hard. But I hope that with some of the things we're developing that everybody gets a little chance both to take some breaks, spend some time with the people they care about, and also recharge and re-energize to move into the fall. And we're just going to keep working. And I appreciate the questions, and I don't mind how they come at me. And you can keep sending them. I enjoy getting them. It means I know how much you care. So don't hesitate to challenge here and push. We'll do the best we can to respond.
Thank you for that. And in closing, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this town hall and your active engagement through your questions. And thank you, Vin, for offering this platform to dialogue about some very critical issues and concerns that we all share. And also to everyone who supported in making this happen. Again, remaining questions that were not answered or addressed have been saved and will be addressed in a future opportunity. Again, please look out for additional opportunities that will be offered to connect and for us to all stay engaged. Thank you again. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your week and weekend. Have a great day.
Shaun, as well. I really appreciate you doing this. Thanks.
Of course. My pleasure. Thank you.